Welcome to the Executive Compensation Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Harvey. On this episode, I'm joined by Michael Brittian. Michael's a partner at Meridian working out of our Dallas office. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ryan. Good to see you.
Great. Most companies stick to three big compensation elements for their executives: base salary, cash bonus, and long-term equity-based awards. But when does it make sense to go outside these three standard vehicles and do something special? Today, we're going to be exploring the use of special one-time equity awards to executives. When should they be considered and when should they be avoided? And how should a special award be structured? If a company does choose to use a special award, how do we avoid the pushback from proxy advisors, investors, and activists? So, Michael, before we dive into some of the details, I want to start with just some basics around defining exactly what we mean by a special award. So, what is it that makes something special as opposed to just part of a normal executive pay package?
Well, Ryan, as you previewed in your introduction, usually we're talking about the normal compensation program as having three core total direct compensation elements: salary, annual cash incentive or annual bonus, and then long-term incentive awards, which are usually equity-based compensation awards for most companies, and usually a couple of two or three different vehicles. And if you think about that as a standard program, companies will typically develop established total compensation levels at target for the executive management team that are informed by benchmarking and internal equity and a host of other things. And so that is what you would maybe frame as the normal program. What we're really talking about today would be an additional supplemental compensation award. It could be in the same form of one of the vehicles we're using already in the normal program, but really it's a supplemental award for a special use purpose above and beyond the normal program. And today, for this purpose, we'll really be focused on special equity incentive compensation.
Okay. And committees spend a lot of time, obviously, working on their normal executive compensation structure. In fact, I think it was just last month we recorded a podcast talking about building resilience into your structure so that it can flex with changes. If you put all that effort into the normal structure, what would be the circumstances where you might say, okay, this is the right circumstance to go outside of that structure and do something special? What might drive that?
Yeah, I think just starting with your point around a resilient program, this has become, I think, a really red hot topic, specifically coming out of 2020, where we all saw this macro event, this worldwide event cause unprecedented disruption to businesses and operations, and then certainly executive comp programs. And out of that, I think certainly saw a number of examples where companies felt like they needed to provide some kind of special compensation action or a supplemental compensation award. And so that really has led to, I think, this theme that we have today around building more resilient compensation programs. And very supportive of that. I think it's the right thing to do for a host of reasons. I think institutional investors are becoming more vocal and expecting programs to be more resilient. I think the challenge is that no matter how resilient you get your executive comp program to be, we just can't always forecast these unexpected needs or circumstances or situations that a company may face that should necessitate the use of a special compensation award outside of the normal program. And so we get into some examples of where might that occur, what are some of the specific situations that we've seen. I'd say most commonly, we'll see special comp awards used to induce a new executive to join a company, or maybe even for promotional purposes for a legacy incumbent executive, the use of these compensation awards for a leadership transition. Sometimes you'll see a special equity award used for recognition or an acknowledgement of something that has occurred at the company that's above and beyond maybe what was expected. An example here may be a company acquires another company, and that has created value as well as taken up an extraordinary amount of additional time that was unexpected. And maybe there's a special acknowledgement of that, of those activities and that value created. And then maybe lastly, in terms of this initial list, the use of a special award for retention purposes, providing an additional equity compensation award to bolster retention hooks, maybe to counter a competitive offer or try to avert that scenario entirely. There might be retention needed in a leadership transition or in anticipation of an acquisition. And usually, while those are more common, those are also the awards that we tend to see designed are more time-based, service vested awards. Not entirely, but I would say predominantly you might see restricted stock or stock options. But really a final scenario, and one that I think we really want to maybe explore a little bit more in today's conversation, would be providing a special equity award that coincides with some kind of significant business transformation or significant business change. And these are awards that tend to be more performance based. And unfortunately, this is where we see a number of examples where, for one reason or another, the intended design or approach just doesn't tend to work.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. Yeah. And one thing I'd add before we get into unpacking the details and the pros and cons and whatnot of special awards, one thing I would say, I always, whenever I speak with a client about a special award, usually the first thing I do before going down that path is just testing, can we accomplish the same thing through the existing plan? Because while using special awards does have some advantages and allows you to highlight certain things, it also has some cost to it. And so I think it's always a healthy question. Can we deliver more value through the existing structure? Could we provide more upside leverage? Can we play with modifiers or metrics? There may be things you can do within your structure that accomplish the same goals and potentially avoid some of the pitfalls. So that's always something to think about. Yeah. So let's assume we've crossed that bridge, we've tested that, and we've decided, no, we want to do something special that's going to really serve the purposes that we're trying to accomplish. Maybe before we get into the design, let's talk a little bit about how this is going to be viewed with all the various external constituencies, proxy advisors, investors, even the general public.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important consideration for any board and management team that might be thinking about putting in a special equity award. And I guess the short answer is that these are frequently viewed with pretty significant skepticism. And I think a lot of this has just evolved over the years with, say, on pay and the increasing influence of proxy advisors, and even the evolution of large institutional investor perspectives and policies with respect to these awards. So I do think that really any kind of special award is often viewed with a little bit of initial skepticism. As we talked about some of the earlier examples around leadership transitions and inducement of executives to join the company, those probably would get around the least amount of criticism, provided that they're more, I think, traditional in terms of quantum, and the rationale is provided very well and clearly communicated in public filings and in investor conversations. But special awards for business transformation and maybe what I call is like outsized performance expectations tend to get a lot of criticism and skepticism. And so I think designing them in the right way, communicating them effectively, and I think some other ideas that we'll share in just a moment can help mitigate, some of those concerns.
Okay. So why don't we get into the details and
Yeah.
how might you design an appropriately structured special award, and what are some of the things to consider to specifically to maybe avoid some of those external pitfalls, but also just to make sure that the program itself is driving what you're trying to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe just starting with what are some examples of when we might see this? And so I reflected on some that I've observed in the market over the years, some that I may have worked on, or others that I've seen other companies use. And here are a few company situations. So one example is maybe a company that decides to exit a certain unprofitable business line and maybe focus on a core business strategy. Maybe there's another example of a company that divests or sells off a business unit and acquires another company, significant change there. Or maybe even a third example of a company that might develop a new innovative technology that is really going to change the whole outlook and focus of the company. I think all three of those kinds of examples merit careful consideration of the need of a special performance-based equity award. The challenge is that a number of examples And I can think of each one of those examples that I described to you, areas in times and situations that the program seemed like it worked effectively, and other situations where the program was really just a completed utter failure.
Mhm.
And the challenge there with one of the big challenges is that a program like that is above and beyond and performance based. When it doesn't work, it can have long lasting effects. It can impact, a number of parties. Oftentimes the participants themselves may be frustrated or unhappy with the outcome. The committee, the compensation committee and the board may be frustrated, and investors who may not have liked the fact that you put out a special award in the first place. And so I think those are some of the real risks. So I guess we get to, okay, what are the problems and maybe what are some potential ways to mitigate those challenges and issues. And so I've got a few for you today, and look forward to any other thoughts that you may have, Ryan. But the first situation that I've seen where, these programs might not work is we've chosen the wrong performance goals. Okay. As I said before, traditionally, because the purpose of these awards is trying to drive some kind of performance outcome related to a significant event or a significant opportunity to create shareholder value, there's performance metrics that are commonly attached to these kinds of awards. And again, because at this point, a company will have likely already concluded that we need to do something above and beyond our normal program, because that's not going to maybe drive the kind of extraordinary performance that we're looking for. And so getting those metrics, and specifically the goals, wrong can have, again, some of the long lasting effects that I shared earlier and create some significant frustration. And getting the goals wrong can mean we set goals that were too aspirational, that were too far ahead of where we thought we would be. I've seen management teams sometimes they get so excited about this new opportunity and the value that it's going to create, and we just set the goals too high, and maybe we fall just short, and those awards don't vest, and everybody's frustrated by that. On the other hand, setting goals that are not sufficiently rigorous can be a significant frustration, particularly to the board and shareholders. An example of that might be we set a performance hurdle, let's say that we think we need to achieve anytime within maybe the next 5 years. And we're thinking, well, we probably won't get there until year 3 or year 4. But then all of a sudden we achieve that threshold in 6 months, and then the award pays out. And what if performance then in year 2 or year 3 after we paid this out has declined to a level before we made the grant? Again, I would say that's equally problematic. And so, look, shareholders, in order to, I think, get comfortable with awards like this that are above and beyond the program, are going to be expecting a stretched level of performance. They are going to be looking for something above and beyond. And there needs to be a significant amount of modeling and analysis to ascertain what the right goals are, and do some pretty thorough stress testing, looking historically at company performance, making some projections as to future performance, looking at historical peers, performance, analyst expectations. I think it really is a multidimensional, but I think iterative and rigorous review of performance. The second area that I think that I commonly see as an issue in these programs is the design of the program is just too complicated. And we have difficulty in communicating to participants how this program works and what you need to do specifically to achieve these results and get paid. And then similarly, confusion among investors. And it's interesting because these programs are above and beyond and quote special. I often hear of the request or the preference in the design of, well, we're looking for something that's innovative or creative. And look, that's great. I think always creativity, innovation, we should be thinking about that in designing these programs. Far too often, in my experience, innovative and creative lead to overly complicated and confusing. Okay. And we can get there very quickly. And so I think even though this is a special award, it's above and beyond, I think companies would be well suited to sort of reground themselves in the basic principles of incentive design, which is simplicity and ensuring that we have a very clear pay and performance message that participants will understand and shareholders will understand. So,
Complication, I've often said that can lead to what I call the lottery ticket syndrome, where
right,
if it pays out, you're happy it paid out, but you're not quite sure why. And if it doesn't pay out, you wished it would have paid out, but again, you don't understand the metrics and you don't understand. So yeah, definitely want to avoid that.
yeah, you've imagined we got a performance based stock option and we have a matrix of performance with shareholder return and EBITDA growth. And then we have this multiplier. It can get, dramatically overly complicated. And I just think let's stay focused on purpose and intent and be clear. And you're more likely to achieve the results that you're looking for. And I guess the one final point I guess I wanted to make just in terms of a reason why sometimes these don't work. And this is when we get to the quantum or the grant amount or even the potential realizable amount being deemed too excessive by investors. As we talked about, investors are going to be skeptical of anything outside the program. And even though these awards are often performance based, which can help mitigate that, sometimes the magnitude is just too much. And unfortunately, there aren't really good bright lines around this because it's all very facts and circumstances, and not every company is doing this every year. And that's not to say we shouldn't look at market. In fact, strongly encourage the use of getting some relevant recent market examples. Sometimes that may mean you have to look over the last couple of years and you may need to go outside your peer group. But it's even then, it's not as simple as coming up with 10 examples and taking the median and saying, okay, well, it's the amount we need to target. I think there's careful review and consideration of market to figure out where in a range do we think we might want to fit relative to the performance. And I guess to this point too, I think what can be helpful in terms of some of the modeling, especially if the award is based on a share price based performance goal or goals. Um, in some ways, this can be a little bit more helpful to communicating to investors the value, the potential value that could be delivered to the participants under the program relative to the aggregate value that's being created for shareholders. For example, if we hit these hurdles, we'll create an additional $20 billion in market cap, and then participants will only receive this small percentage of that. And isn't this an obvious way where we're all winning? I think that can be an effective way of thinking about and communicating the benefits of a program. But really, Ryan, wrapped around all of this, you have to have, I think, a very robust and effective process for the committee. And it's not something that should be rushed. It's something that should be reviewed carefully over multiple committee meetings, off-cycle meetings if needed. Strongly encourage the use of an independent compensation advisor to provide some market perspective. And to the extent that there are other maybe extenuating circumstances, maybe if the award is intended to be larger, or maybe if you have a founder CEO that's maybe going to be a recipient, the inclusion of outside legal counsel, I think, can be very helpful in ensuring a very credible and defensible process. But spend the time up front on purpose and intent and objectives, and definitely make sure that this is something that we feel like we need to do outside of the normal program. Collect the relevant and timely examples and do the modeling. As I said, review over multiple meetings and don't overlook a great communication plan to your participants, but also to shareholders. In some cases, that might mean getting Q&As set up for committee chair, for investor outreach, drafting a press release, the 8K, the proxy language. I would think broadly about all of that before approving any award.
Yeah. No, all very excellent things to consider as you wrestle with the idea of a special award. And I guess maybe one final point I just reinforced that you made earlier, but let's not forget to keep special awards special.
Right.
We call them special because they should be rare. They should be unique, probably only happening once or maybe twice a decade. If all of a sudden special awards are becoming unspecial, that might be a bit of a warning sign that maybe you need to reconsider just the broader structure and make sure that the overall structure is doing what it needs to be doing.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a very, very good conversation, very helpful, Michael. Thanks again for joining the podcast today.
Great, Ryan. Appreciate the discussion.